My name is Cal Reeves, and I want to tell you something about first impressions. They are almost always wrong. Not completely wrong. Not wrong about everything, but wrong about the things that matter most, because the things that matter most are the things that take time to see, and first impressions do not have time. Commander Rael Sova made a first impression of me in approximately 4 seconds. I saw it happen. She looked at me in the docking bay of the Deep Space Operations vessel. Kareth 9 took in everything that was visible and measurable about me in the time it takes most people to decide whether to shake hands, and arrived at a conclusion that was accurate about what I appeared to be and completely wrong about what I was actually useful for. She gave me 1 hour. Not unkindly. She was not an unkind person. She was a precise and busy person running a vessel that had a specific problem and a crew that had been working on that problem for 3 days without solving it, and a posting schedule that did not have room for a human exchange crew member who had arrived on the wrong day and whose assignment paperwork had come through 12 hours late. 1 hour, she said. Show me something useful. Then we will talk about whether this posting works. I said that was fair. She pointed me toward the engineering section and went back to the command deck, and I picked up my kit and went to find the problem. It took me 6 minutes to find it, because I had learned a long time ago that the fastest way to find a problem on an unfamiliar ship was to stop looking for the problem on an unfamiliar ship was to stop looking for the problem directly and start listening to the ship instead. Ships talk if you know how to hear them, not loudly, not obviously, but in the particular combination of sounds and readings and small behavioral patterns that add up to a language once you have spent enough time learning it. The Kareth 9 had been speaking clearly for 3 days. Her crew had been listening to individual words. I listened to the sentence. The problem was in the interface between the navigation array and the secondary power grid, which was not where anyone had been looking because the navigation array and the secondary power grid were not systems that were supposed to interact with each other in any way that could produce the fault pattern the crew had been chasing. They were not supposed to interact, they were interacting. Anyway, through a harmonic resonance pathway that ran through the structural frame in a section where 2 conduit runs had been installed closer together than the original specification called for, probably during a refit that had needed to route around something else and had made a small compromise that nobody had flagged because individually neither conduit was doing anything wrong. Together, at a specific power cycling frequency that the Kareth 9 hit during high-demand navigation operations, they were producing an interference pattern that looked from every diagnostic angle like 3 separate faults in 3 separate systems and was actually one cause in one place. I found the place in 6 minutes. I verified it in 8. I had it corrected in 20. Then I went to find Commander Rael Sova. She was on the command deck with her chief engineer. And 22. Then I went to find Commander Rael Sova. She was on the command deck with her chief engineer, a Catherine named Vaughn who had been chasing the fault for 3 days and who had the expression of someone who was very good at their job and was personally offended by a problem that had not yet yielded to being very good at their job. I told her I had found the fault and corrected it, and that the navigation array and secondary power grid should now be running clean, and that I had documented the repair and the root cause and the specific conduit proximity issue that had generated it so that it could be checked on any other vessels that had gone through the same refit. She looked at me. She looked at Vaughn. Vaughn pulled up the diagnostic screen and looked at it for a long moment. He said the fault indicators were clear. He said all 3 of them. He looked at the repair documentation I had filed and read it with the thoroughness of someone who needed to understand exactly what had been done before he was willing to accept that it had been done before he was willing to accept that it had been done correctly. Then he looked at me. He said, "Where did you find the resonance pathway?" I said the frame section between bulkheads 9 and 11. The 2 conduit runs are 11 centimeters closer together than specification in that section. Close enough to produce harmonic interaction at the specific frequency the navigation array cycles at during high-demand operations. He said that section was behind a structural panel that was not on the standard maintenance access map. I said I know. I found it by following the resonance signature from the diagnostic readings. The readings pointed to a location that did not have a listed access point, so I looked for an unlisted one. He said, "You found an unlisted access panel." I said there are usually 3 or 4 on any vessel of this class. The refits add them, and they do not always make it into the updated documentation. He looked at Commander Rael Sova, and then back at me, and then at the diagnostic screen again. Commander Rael Sova had been watching all of this with the particular attention of someone who had made a first impression and was currently revising it. She said 20 minutes. I said approximately. The verification took a few extra minutes because I wanted to be sure of the resonance pathway before I made the correction. She said, Vaughn and his team had been working on this for 3 days. I said they were looking at the fault symptoms. I looked for the fault source. Different star. Ting point. She looked at me steadily. She said, how did you know to look at the frame section between bulkheads 9 and 11? I said I did not know specifically. I followed the sound. She said, the sound. I said the ship makes a specific harmonic when 2 conduit runs are interacting through a shared frame section. It is low frequency, and it is easy to miss, unless you are listening for it. I have heard it twice before on other vessels, and I recognized it here. She was quiet for a moment. She said you heard it when you came aboard. I said in the first few minutes, yes. She said you have been on this vessel for less than 30 minutes total. I said 28 minutes at the point when I filed the repair documentation. She looked at Vaughn one more time. Vaughn had the expression of someone who had arrived at a conclusion they had not expected to arrive at and was being professionally honest about it. He said the repair is correct and complete, and the documentation is thorough, and the root cause identification is accurate. He paused. He said, I would not have found the unlisted access panel. He said it with the directness of someone who valued accuracy over comfort, and I respected it. Commander, Rail Sova, turn back to me. She said, Cal Reeves. I said yes. She said your posting paperwork arrived 12 hours late, and your assignment summary described you as a general systems technician with experience on mid-range cargo vessels. I said that is accurate. She said it does not mention any of this. I said posting paperwork rarely does. It describes what I have been assigned to do, not what I have learned along the way. She looked at me for a long moment. She said, I gave you 1 hour. I said, I know. She said you used 20 minutes. I said the problem only needed 20 minutes once I found it. She said, what did you do with the other 8 minutes before you came to find me? I said I checked the 2 adjacent frame sections to make sure there were no other close proximate conduit issues from the same refit. She said, we're there. I said, 1 minor one in the section between bulkheads 14 and 16. Not currently causing a problem, but worth monitoring. I noted it in the repair documentation. She was quiet. Then she said something I had not expected. She said she had given a lot of crew members 1 hour over the years. She said most of them spent the hour trying to look useful. She said she had never given anyone an hour and had them come back in 20 minutes with the problem solved and 2 additional observations documented. I said I was not trying to look useful. I was trying to find the fault. She said yes, she said slowly. I can see that. She looked at Vaughn one more time and he gave her a single nod that meant what single nods from experienced engineers mean when they are confirming something to a commander who already knows the answer. She said, your posting is confirmed. She said report to Vaughn in the morning for a full ship orientation. She paused. She said the official orientation, not the version you have already given yourself. I said understood. She almost did something with her expression that was not quite a smile, but was not quite a smile, but was in the same direction. She turned back to the command deck, and I turned toward the crew quarters, and behind me I heard Vaughn say something quietly to the crew member beside him that my translator caught as follows. He said 28 minutes. He said, remember that number. I did not turn around, but I thought about it later in my bunk in the quiet dark of the Karath 9 while the ship ran her systems around me in the particular voice I had been learning since the moment I came aboard. 28 minutes, not because I was fast, not because I was exceptional, but because I had been listening to ships for 12 years and I had learned to hear what they were saying, and I had never once assumed that an unfamiliar ship had nothing to teach me. Every ship had something to teach you. You just had to be willing to listen. I closed my eyes and listened to the Karath 9 running clean and quiet and completely herself again, and thought that tomorrow was going to be a good first full day. It was.